Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around I'm playing as the Dark Elves against the dwarves led by Turtle on the map Volksgrad. And this is definitely one of the more, I think, if not the most in the current meta, with the possible exception, I think, of High Elves against Wood Elves. I think this might be the most skewed matchup in the current Total War Warhammer 2 situation, is actually Dark Elves against dwarves. And you might be wondering why that is. Dwarves have actually gotten several very major buffs in this past patch. Most of their great weapon infantry, actually I think all of their great weapon infantry has gotten significant buffs, especially the hammerers, but the others as well. Slayers have gotten cheaper. Most importantly, they now have much better access to crowd control or to area denial, or I suppose it would be crowd control or control spells across the board. They can now field up to 4 units with slows or nets, essentially. Grumbrindle, of course, with Flash Bomb. And the Dragon Max Slayers, as usual, with their speed debuff. But now you can also either field 2 Runesmiths, or you can field, I guess, a Rune Lord or a Runesmiths, up to 2 Runesmiths, who are all, with their Rune of Wrath and Rune, can provide a slow. And then Thanes, and the Thanes have now gotten Tormentor Swords, and that's 19-second immobility. In an AoE, so that both of those. So now they have much more control, and that has actually negated what it used to be, or helped negate one of the greatest problems dwarves face. So really, why are Dark Elves so overpowered, in my opinion, and so imbalanced compared to dwarves? And it really just comes down to Darkshards. Because Darkshards, of course, have very high armor-piercing DPS. These guys have silver shields, which means that they can actually tank through the Dawi shooting line in general, and then gun them down through their bronze shields and tear through them rather quickly. But I definitely think that's a bit of a problem. The rest of the units, honestly, for High Elves or Dark Elves are not that good, so I don't think those really cause too much imbalance, but I think that is one specific problem. Now, I did bring here a Dreadlord with a Sword and Shield, simply to get good flying damage in. Breath Spell, of course, Source of Terror, Armor Piercing. Dwarves, despite the fact that they have more control spells, still struggle to stop large, massive targets, especially as long as you avoid those spells or those units that can control you like that. And of course, the Dragon-mounted Lord does provide a AoE buff to melee attack. She, of course, does have enemy weapon strength debuff, and yeah, just can do a lot of damage with Hydra Blade. Just a very strong unit in general. Alongside her, I did bring a Death Hag mounted on a Cauldron of Blood. Of course, she can. She has 2 abilities. She can either, I guess 2 castable abilities, one of which is the Fury of Cain, which makes a unit rampage for 60 seconds, but of course that boosts their stats by an immense amount. And then Witchbrew, which is the same, essentially, except it only affects her, and it actually has a limited amount of charges. She does, of course, a Frenzy. She has Chill Blade, which is an AoE debuff, which means I've got a lot of debuffs in this army, potentially. She does have Murderous Mastery. And Immunity to Psychology does cost Terror, built-in physical resistance, and missile resistance, and actually magic resistance, which is not that relevant against dwarves, but still, and 80 armor, so the Death Hag is actually very tanky. My front line is a mix of Bleak Swords and 4 units of Blackheart Corsairs, backed by a single unit of Hargoneth Executioners, who are quickly falling behind their faster brethren. And I have 5 units of Darkshards here in the back with shields. These guys, of course, will tear through most dwarven infantry very, very quickly. And then I do have a single Sorceress of Shadow, who I did forget to mention. She is over here on foot, yeah, nothing too fancy, and stripped down to only 2 spells, the Withering and Enfeebling Foe, so simply debuffs, and Darkstar Cloaks to improve my power recharge rate. It is my opinion that I generally don't like damage spells, not in the Lore of Shadows at any rate. It is my opinion that generally the debuffs are much better as the mobility buffs. Now, my Lord here is being sniped at a little bit. My opponent brought an interesting build, actually. My opponent brought Thorgrim Grudgebearer, which is not that surprising. With his High King buff, he can provide Frenzy if he's dying, and or if he's King beaten down. And of course, with the Book of Grudges, he provides a big old melee attack buff, though it's not as big as it used to be. It's +9 instead of +12. And my opponent does have a Thane with the Tormentor Sword, which could be a problem, as well as Foe Seeker, and a Master Engineer with a Fiery Ring, which is actually surprising. It's got moved over from the Lord, I do believe. Entrenchment, which is a big buff to physical resistance and armor piercing damage that prevents the unit from moving, and of course then he affects enemy nearby allies reload skill and accuracy, and he affects their explosive and armor piercing explosion damage. Now my opponent does have a front line composed of a mix of miners with blasting charges, as well as longbeards and longbeards with great weapons, which is honestly a respectable force against our dark elves. Who it doesn't mean these guys are largely immune to fear. They can tear through most of your infantry rather effectively, and hold their ground pretty well, especially against Blackheart Corsairs. The reason I brought Blackheart Corsairs is because though they don't have armor piercing, they do have a bonus against large. They do actually. I'm not sure if this is caused by the cauldron. It is caused by the cauldron, the physical resistance, but they are getting a slight buff from that, and of course they have decent armor. So they're honestly, a little bit like bringing longbeards. They're just there to tank and slay it out. And then, man, my opponent has a bit of a surprising composition here. Unit of Iron Drakes with Troll Hammers, which now have a true bonus against large, but do less damage per shot, I do believe, versus normal targets. And these guys could definitely tear through my Flying Lord, and Slayers, of course, who are anti-large. My opponent does have an organ gun as well as a cannon, who are already whittling down my troops. I have hit these longbeards with a breath attack, and that dropped them by a decent amount. You can see I'm casting a Withering here as I push in with the Blackheart Corsairs as quickly as I can, just trying to tank through these satchel charges, which are being blocked by trees a little bit. My Death Hag plows through right away, and now I'm simply trying to swamp my opponent. You can see I'm even pushing my Sorcerer of Shadows into the fray, not really counting on her to do too much. You can see those some crossbow fires going in and actually beating through these longbeards very, very quickly, especially now that the Blackheart Corsairs are in there. The Withering is providing a decent debuff to their armor, and with their bonus against infantry, of course, the Blackheart Corsairs are doing relatively well. The Dragon, in the meantime, has, despite taking in some nasty shots from these cannons, has actually managed to rout out the organ gun crew, and is now able to take to the air, and she'll be able to take out these cannons. In the meantime, the Blackheart Corsairs are winning the front line. You can see these Dark Shards are peppering away at my opponent's troops, and now are actually targeting the Trollhammer. I'm actually not entirely sure if they're targeting the Trollhammer torpedoes or the Lord there, or the Engineer. But they're definitely whittling down the Iron Drakes. You can see a fire ring here does go through and hits the Blackheart Corsairs. But actually, I think I made a pretty good decision here. I did hit the Slayers with the breath, but I do think I made a good decision here because with the Blackheart Corsairs, because they're tanky. The fiery ring, while it's very powerful against squishy targets, it will not do very much to the Blackheart Corsairs. Now, Argonath Executioners, as well as the Witch or the Hag, both have Murderous Mastery, but unfortunately, the Hag was routing as that hit, so it's going to take her a little while to get back in the fight. You can see the Darkshards are not firing very much, but what they have been firing on, they've basically broken through. Now they're breaking these longbeards. And my opponent's front line here is slowly but surely buckling. He's been reduced to just these two heroes, Thane and Thorgrim, and a handful of Trollhammers over here who have been hit by entrenchment, but that's simply not really helping them very much. It does prevent them from moving, which is a pretty serious problem. In the meantime, these cannon crews have been routed off, though my opponent is trying to bring them back onto the field. Slayers are badly beaten up, and they will not trade that well with Blackheart Corsairs, though they will tear through Bleak Swords very quickly. Now you can see a Tormentor Sword is going down, locking me in place. Another Breath Attack is going down and really hurting these miners, blasting charges, these Longbeards, and with Great Weapons and Longbeards. And now these poor Iron Drakes, the fact that they're entrenched is preventing them from turning to face my Lord. And you can see they're actually being routed off here by the Dark Shard fire. Now my opponent is bringing these guns back online, trying to push back my poor Dark Shards over here. You can see another debuff is going down. I do believe another Withering. I'm simply trying to essentially just break. I do pop a Witch Brew here just to keep my Cauldron of Blood in the fight. Trying to break through Thorgrim. And now you can see the organ guns and cannons are doing absolute work against my Dark Shards, who are very clumped up. Now, one of the interesting things, and you might be wondering why I'm going in with keeping my shooting infantry in boxes, and this actually has to do with efficiency. You can see over here, but in the meantime, I'm slowly but surely winning against Thorgrim and the Slayers and the gang of the Thane here, and doing rather well. You can see the poor Master Engineers getting swamped. But you might be wondering why I'm bringing Dark Shards in and keeping them in a box, because obviously that makes them much more susceptible to organ gun or cannon fire or artillery fire in general. And that's actually simply, it has to do with turn rate. Shooting units turn faster if they're in a box, because they wait until the units on the corners are set up to fire, and of course the distance is longer, and it takes them longer to fully turn the line if they're stretched out in a spaghetti line than if you have them in a box. So that's just a little interesting little tidbit. You'll get a little faster response time if you keep your archers in a box, and obviously that does make you a bit more susceptible to damage, a lot more susceptible, and it shows in the kill counts for the cannons and organ guns in this game. At this point, my infantry is shattering my opponent's line, and the Slayers get picked off, and that is simply game. The Dark Shards did not actually rake in that many kills, so it might not look that impressive, but they actually tore through some pretty high value targets. They beat through the Longbeards with great weapons very quickly. They focused down the Iron Drakes. They helped focus down the cannons and artillery at the end. And the front line was very much won by the Blackheart Corsairs, and the Hargadeth Executioners did very well, especially backed by the Death Hag and the Dreadlord hitting my opponent with Noxious Breath. All in all, I simply think the current, especially with the help of Withering, I think that currently Dark Elves have a very, very good, rather favorable matchup against Dawi. In spite of the fact that the Dwarves, Iron Drakes have gone down in price, Longbeards are all the units with great weapons, are better. Slayers are cheaper. Organ guns are better. Despite all of these buffs, and of course they have Tormentor Sword now, and much more better access to slows and that sort of control abilities. Despite all of those buffs, I think Dwarves have a rough time against Dark Elves because Dark Elves simply bring a boatload of armor-piercing ranged fire, and have a front line that can hold reasonably well against Dwarves. Obviously, the Blackheart Corsairs are a little bit of a risk. I actually saw on the map that it was a wooded map, so I didn't realize that I could probably sneak up on my opponent without shields, without needing the shields. Sometimes, if you see that the map is a little somewhat worse, it might be a better idea to bring additional Bleak Swords instead. These guys will not do anywhere near as well against Dwarves as the Blackheart Corsairs, but they will tank through fire a little better. Otherwise, you need to be a little sneaky or just accept the losses for the Blackheart Corsairs, or try to disrupt your opponent's range fire as well, or distract them. There's a lot of ways you can try to deal with it, but you need to have some sort of way of mitigating your enemy's range fire. My opponent was a little unconventional here because he did not bring any Thunders. The Thunders would not have actually been very useful, I don't think, but they would have helped zone, with the exception of zoning my Dreadlord away and potentially actually killing her. Though my opponent would have had to sacrifice some of his front line for that. It's definitely an interesting game. My opponent, as you can see, Dwarf Infantry fighting till the last. I definitely think this is one of the most skewed matchups. It might be the most skewed matchup in the current meta, with the exception, I think, of Wood Elves against High Elves, which is very favorable to High Elves. So, but regardless, it was a good game. It was a good game. It was a fun game. And I do hope you guys enjoyed it, and I do hope it showed you guys some of the problems that you might be facing as Dwarves. My personal opinion is that you definitely want to bring some Thunders if you're playing as Dwarves. Focus fire on high priority targets such as Hargadeth Executioners, and enemy Flying Lords or enemy Death Hags and that sort of stuff. Don't bother trying to kill off the Darkshards really with your Thunders. The Darkshards will simply be able to outtrade you probably. So you're simply better off just trying to kill off high priority enemy targets and essentially wasting their time while you try to win in the front line. I think the Dwarves definitely have a decent amount of chance against High Elves if they can win in the front line and you just focus your opponent's high priority targets down. Otherwise, you can of course try to bring Quarrelers. You can also bring Quarrelers, and they're not a terrible match against Darkshards just because they are cheaper. Either Quarrelers or Rangers even, because Rangers at 500 are significantly cheaper, and they although they only have bronze shields, they will hit relatively hard against the lightly armored Darkshards when they do bypass their shields. So you definitely have some options as Dwarves. There's definitely some room for counterplay, but you have to be clever with it. Definitely look out. And yeah, I think the Longbeards are a good idea. I think generally Dragonback Slayers are a better idea than normal Slayers. And, yeah, and I wouldn't say Master Engineer is the greatest picks, but. Well, that good game to my opponent. It was a lot of fun. It was interesting to see the artillery work, and of course, it did very well against my box formations with the archers. And I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If any comments, be sure to leave those down below. And if any comments, criticism, any questions, or suggestions, be sure to post those down, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye for now.